The grand ballroom shimmered under a constellation of crystal chandeliers, their light bouncing off gilded mirrors and polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and fresh roses, mingling with the crisp tang of champagne. Waiters moved gracefully among the guests, balancing silver trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres, while the soft murmur of conversation wove through the room like an intricate tapestry. Everywhere, the city's elite mingled, business magnates laughing over high-stakes deals, socialites whispering behind fans of lace and silk, and cameras clicking relentlessly, capturing the perfect angles of glamour and success. The ambience was intoxicating, a seductive blend of power, wealth, and opportunity. Yet beneath the sparkle, subtle undercurrents of tension ran like hidden currents beneath a smooth river. Sophia stood near the grand staircase, her posture flawless, a vision in an emerald silk gown that hugged her silhouette with effortless grace. To the casual eye, she was the embodiment of calm and poise, radiating elegance and charm. But inside, a storm simmered. Every polite nod, every carefully measured laugh, masked a swirl of emotions: disappointment, resentment, and a quietly growing resolve. Alexander, her husband, moved through the room like a man accustomed to command. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, his confident smile charming onlookers, his every gesture calculated to display power and control. Yet beneath the surface of confidence lingered subtle arrogance, a quiet assumption that the world, and Sophia herself, revolved around him. He laughed heartily at anecdotes from business rivals and flaunted his latest acquisitions, from a private yacht to a newly secured international property, delighting in the envy and admiration of his peers. Sophia's smile remained impeccable, but her eyes darted occasionally toward a figure standing across the room, a stranger whose presence seemed to unsettle her in the smallest, most precise ways. Alexander, oblivious to her glances, continued his performance, unaware that his wife's mind was already several steps ahead, weaving a quiet, meticulous plan that could upend the empire he so proudly displayed. There was a subtle choreography to her movements, a deliberate precision in every gesture, every sip of champagne, every tilt of her head. Beneath the glitz and laughter, Sophia's controlled demeanor hinted at a hidden purpose, a decisive plan forming silently, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The gala was beautiful, dazzling, and intoxicating, but it was also the calm before a storm that would shake the foundation of everything Alexander thought he controlled. Sophia moved through the crowd with a grace that belied the storm raging within her. Each polite smile, each nod of acknowledgement, was a mask carefully worn to conceal years of disappointment and quiet frustration. Luxury had surrounded her for as long as she could remember: designer gowns, exotic vacations, sprawling estates, but none of it had filled the emptiness of a marriage devoid of true intimacy. Alexander's charm had always been magnetic, intoxicating to everyone but her, and over the years, it had revealed itself as a tool of manipulation. Promises whispered over candlelit dinners had vanished into thin air, leaving her with only resentment and resolve. She had loved him once, truly, but the illusion had shattered long ago, leaving her to navigate a gilded cage with precision, patience, and cunning. Tonight, something had shifted. The weight of pretense was too heavy, and she could no longer remain a silent participant in Alexander's carefully orchestrated world. Sophia's decision had been made long before the gala, every contingency considered, every possibility calculated. Now, under the dazzling chandeliers and the soft chatter of elite voices, she executed her plan with absolute precision. She slipped quietly down a rarely used side corridor, her heels making barely a sound on the marble floor. A hidden staircase offered a private route away from the main halls, its shadows concealing her movements from the prying eyes of security and socialites alike. Each step was deliberate, measured, every motion part of a choreography honed over weeks of preparation. In her hand, she carried only the essentials, leaving behind any trace that could betray her intentions. As she departed, she placed a small but meaningful token in the center of the grand ballroom: a single silk glove, neatly folded, or perhaps a delicate pendant on the polished table by the orchestra. To the casual observer, it was an elegant accessory misplaced. To Alexander, it would be a whisper of what was to come, a hint of the carefully orchestrated storm she was about to unleash. Every heartbeat echoed in her chest like a drum, yet she maintained an exterior of calm control. Each glance over her shoulder, each turn through shadowed corridors, was part of a calculated dance. Her mind was sharp, aware of every possible observer, every potential complication. The tension in her chest was matched only by the thrill of freedom she was about to claim, a dangerous blend of fear and anticipation coursing through her veins. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, casting long streaks across the polished floors and the silk sheets where Alexander had slept. He stirred, expecting the familiar warmth beside him, a soft sound of breathing or the faint rustle of Sophia moving about the room. At first, he assumed she had simply gone for an early walk or to tend to a morning appointment, an inconvenience, perhaps, but nothing more. Yet, as minutes stretched into uneasy moments, a creeping unease settled in. He called her name, his voice low and questioning, then sharper, then tinged with irritation. Silence answered him. His first instinct was denial, a mental refusal to accept what his senses were confirming. The doors were unlocked, her favorite car was absent from the driveway, and the faint scent of her perfume, usually lingering in the room, had vanished entirely. Panic began to seep into Alexander's mind, replacing his customary arrogance with the first tendrils of fear. Each unanswered call to her phone, each ignored message, widened the chasm of uncertainty. Something was wrong, and for the first time, he felt the fragile grip of control he had always taken for granted beginning to slip. The world outside the gilded walls of the mansion seemed oblivious at first, but the silence of her absence quickly ignited a chain reaction. By mid-morning, social media was alive with speculation. Gala photos surfaced online, whispers of a dramatic disappearance swirling through the digital ether. Influencers, journalists, and gossip pages dissected every frame of Sophia's last public appearances, constructing theories and fueling rumors. Alexander's carefully curated public image, built over decades of meticulous management, now trembled under the weight of speculation and curiosity. Within his business empire, cracks began to appear almost simultaneously. Key associates questioned his judgment. Board members exchanged private messages filled with doubt. Deals that had seemed secure only hours before now faltered as partners hesitated, uncertainty spreading like wildfire through networks he had always assumed were loyal. Every accolade, every triumph, suddenly felt precarious. The world outside the gilded walls of the mansion seemed oblivious at first, but the silence of her absence quickly ignited a chain reaction. By mid-morning, social media was alive with speculation. Gala photos surfaced online, whispers of a dramatic disappearance swirling through the digital ether. Influencers, journalists, and gossip pages dissected every frame of Sophia's last public appearances, constructing theories and fueling rumors. Alexander's carefully curated public image, built over decades of meticulous management, now trembled under the weight of speculation and curiosity. Within his business empire, cracks began to appear almost simultaneously. Key associates questioned his judgment. Board members exchanged private messages filled with doubt. Deals that had seemed secure only hours before now faltered as partners hesitated, uncertainty spreading like wildfire through networks he had always assumed were loyal. Every accolade, every triumph, suddenly felt precarious. Alexander's arrogance, the very armor he had worn so confidently, began to crumble. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. He had been blind. While he focused on power, acquisitions, and appearances, he had ignored the one person whose knowledge, presence, and resolve could undermine or elevate him. Now, Sophia's absence was not just physical, it was a revelation of his vulnerabilities. The empire he had thought untouchable, the reputation he had cultivated with obsessive care, all hung by a thread. The psychological impact was immediate and unrelenting. Panic intertwined with disbelief, frustration merged with desperation, and every attempt to regain control only magnified the chaos. By mid-morning, Alexander was forced to confront the staggering truth. Sophia's disappearance was more than an inconvenience. It was the first move in a game he had never anticipated, a game he was ill-prepared to survive. Sophia's disappearance was far from impulsive. It had been meticulously planned over months, each detail anticipated and accounted for. Flashbacks reveal her quiet diligence, late nights reviewing contracts, consulting with discreet legal advisors, and documenting every instance of Alexander's manipulation and deception. She had ensured her own safety first, securing legal protections that would prevent him from reclaiming access to her finances or personal assets. More than that, She had quietly aligned herself with loyal allies, lawyers, financial experts, and confidants who understood the stakes and were ready to act at the precise moment she left the gala. Her maneuvers were subtle yet devastating. While Alexander slept, oblivious to the world crumbling around him, Sophia orchestrated the transfer of critical assets, froze accounts linked to questionable dealings, and discreetly alerted regulators and business partners to irregularities she had uncovered. Each action was invisible to him, yet its effects were immediate, like invisible threads slowly unraveling a carefully constructed empire. No confrontation was necessary. Sophia's intelligence, patience, and strategy ensured that her plan unfolded flawlessly, with every domino falling exactly as intended. By late morning, the consequences became undeniable. Investments he had considered untouchable began to fail, plunging markets into uncertainty. Longtime business partners, sensing instability and fearing association with a leader now exposed as both vulnerable and distracted, resigned en masse. Sponsors and collaborators withdrew support, citing unforeseen circumstances, leaving Alexander isolated at the helm of an empire suddenly adrift. Media outlets, hungry for drama, splashed his failures across headlines, painting a portrait of a titan brought low not by competitors but by the woman he had underestimated most. Alexander's frantic attempts to contact Sophia yielded nothing. Every call went unanswered, every message unread, intensifying his desperation. He realized, belatedly and painfully, that he had been blind to her resolve, blind to her meticulous preparation, and blind to the cracks in the life he assumed was indestructible. The world he thought he controlled now seemed to move independently, a relentless tide pulling him into chaos. The contrast between external opulence and internal emptiness could not have been starker. His high-rise offices, gleaming with polished glass and steel, seemed hollow. The private jets that once carried him in comfort now felt like gilded cages. Every symbol of wealth and status, each trophy, each luxury, had lost its meaning, rendered meaningless without control, respect, or the one person whose absence had exposed his vulnerability. The first golden rays of sunrise spilled across the horizon, casting the secluded coastal villa in a soft, almost ethereal glow. Sophia stood barefoot on the balcony, the gentle wind tugging at her emerald gown, her eyes tracing the endless stretch of turquoise waves below. Every sound, the distant cry of gulls, the rhythm of the surf, felt sharper than the world she had left behind. For the first time in years, she breathed without constraint. Freedom was no longer a concept, it was tangible, and it carried with it both joy and the bittersweet ache of what she had lost and endured. She thought of the gala, the glittering chandeliers, Alexander's proud smile, and the countless moments she had silenced herself for the sake of appearances. A faint pang struck her chest, not for the man who had betrayed her, but for the life she could have had, one of love, trust, and shared dreams rather than gilded cages and control. Yet, beneath the ache was a current of triumph, a quiet pride in her meticulous planning and the courage to reclaim her life on her own terms. In stark contrast, Alexander's world had become a hollow echo of its former grandeur. His sprawling penthouse, filled with polished marble and gold accents, felt suffocatingly empty. Business partners had fled, media scrutiny was relentless, and every attempt to reach Sophia returned only silence. The empire he had built, once the envy of the world, now lay fractured and vulnerable. His arrogance, the shield he had wielded so effortlessly, had betrayed him, leaving a raw wound of humiliation and regret. Every luxury, cars, jets, mansions, was now meaningless. Without respect, love, or control, his wealth felt like ashes in his hands. Yet even in solitude, Sophia sensed the faint tremor of unresolved possibilities. On her villa's desk lay a small, unmarked envelope, slipped there by an unseen hand, a whisper of unfinished business, a message she had not anticipated. She smiled softly, letting the suspense linger like a heartbeat. Some battles, some secrets, would follow her into the future, but she felt ready now, strengthened by her victory and tempered by the ache of experience. As she watched the sun rise fully above the horizon, Sophia felt a complex swell of freedom and longing. The story of betrayal and power had ended, yet its echoes lingered in the quiet corners of her heart. She was no longer the woman who had silently endured. She was empowered, vigilant, and alive, but the ache of what had been lost and the cost of her liberation would never fully fade. That bittersweet ache, she realized, was the price of true freedom, and the mark of a life finally reclaimed.